In 1995, Descent was released for MS-DOS PCs. A first-person shooter unlike any before it, Descent was a fresh, well-received spin on a genre that was still relatively young. If you've watched other videos on my channel, it won't surprise you when I say that retro FPSs are some of my favorite games out there, but it might surprise you to learn that, until very recently, I had never played Descent. After my first playthrough, I thought it would be a great game to cover for the channel, especially if you're someone like me who's new to the franchise. So today we'll be taking a peek into the history of the game and giving a general overview of it. As a quick note, the majority of the footage of Descent in this video will not be of the original DOS version, but of an upgraded source port from modern machines called D1X Rebirth. This source port keeps the gameplay the same as the original, while offering upgrades like higher resolution video output, higher frame rates, additional settings, and some minor lighting effects. Some footage of the DOS version will be used. I'll be putting text on screen when footage switches between the two. Descent began as an idea formulated by two programmers, Mike Kulas and Matt Toshlog. According to the June and July 1995 issue of Game Developer magazine, the two met while working on Flight Simulator 2 for Sublogic in 1986. While their work on Flight Simulator 2 certainly was an influence on Descent, what really sparked their imaginations was their work on other games, such as Ultima Underworld, which featured texture-mapped environments. Even their earliest plans for Descent intended for the game to use polygons, rather than the pseudo-3D visuals seen in games such as Wolfenstein 3D. But the use of texture mapping brought about a question. What if Descent used texture map polygons for true 3D visuals? Descent was an ambitious project for 1993, when the first true design document was authored by Kulas and Toshlog. Starting their own company, the two programmers and their eventual employees found a publisher in Apogee, a well-known publisher of a number of beloved DOS games. However, the financial burden to Apogee grew too great as the scope of the Descent project became increasingly large, forcing Apogee to drop Parallax and Descent. But that didn't mean Parallax couldn't find another publisher, and find one they did. Interplay was happy to throw Parallax something of a life preserver for Descent, becoming their new publisher and ensuring the project would be completed. Descent finally saw release in March of 1995, with ports to other platforms like Mac OS, the PlayStation, and RISC OS being released in the following years. Set in a distant future, the player controls a mercenary hired by a mining corporation, with the goal of destroying mining robots who have been compromised by a computer virus that makes them extremely aggressive. As the mercenary, you'll be traveling across mining stations set on various planets, rescuing workers taken hostage after the robots became infected. The ultimate goal of each level is to destroy mines by tracking down and destroying the reactor in each one, which will give the player a short time limit to find the exit door and fly off to safety. Finding this exit before destroying the reactor is essential if the player doesn't want to be blown up along with the mine. The tools to complete your mission are the vehicle for Descent's unique take on the FPS. The player controls a spacecraft that has an interesting relationship with gravity. The spacecraft can float in place, hover in any direction, and make use of a variety of weapons. This essentially means that the player isn't locked to movement on one plane. Up and down are defined simply by how your vehicle is oriented. This style of movement was dubbed 6 degrees of freedom, since the player has control of both the 3 rotational axes and the 3 movement axes. One of the games Descent was compared to the most was Doom. The two did share plenty of similarities in terms of gameplay. Both are 3D first-person shooters with a variety of weapons at the player's disposal, a number of enemies with unique abilities, texture-mapped environments, and the goal of collecting color-coded keys to open up locked-off areas and levels. However, it's Descent's differences that make it so unique. Descent's 6 degrees of freedom differed quite a bit from Doom's comparatively limited movement. In Doom, the player is hindered by gravity, only allowing them to move along the floor, upstairs, along walkways, and so on. While Descent featured true 3D polygonal environments and enemies, Doom did not. Instead, the game's 3D was the result of very clever programming tricks. As a side effect of this, the original release did not allow the player to look up or down, only left and right. Looking up or down reveals the true nature of the game's 3D. The environment will appear to warp when the player does so. Of course, later source ports removed these limitations, but they were definitely there in the game's original release. Doom's enemies were also 2D sprites, which switched to different sprites representing the front, back, and sides of enemies when necessary. Descent's infected robots were polygonal 3D models, complete with texture mapping. Doom's restrictions also applied to 1994's Doom 2, the most recent title in the Doom series at the time of Descent's release. Descent's technical advantages over some of the biggest 3D games of the time period were a big deal, but that wasn't the only thing to set it apart from its contemporaries. Descent has its own unique look and feel. Let's get started with the controls. Descent offers a wide variety of control options right out of the box, supporting keyboard only, keyboard and mouse, joysticks, and control pads. I used keyboard and mouse through my playthrough, but from what I've gathered, all control methods work well. Essentially, every function can be mapped to any button regardless of control method, allowing the player to customize their controls however they see fit. If you're used to keyboard and mouse controls in other first-person shooters, the keyboard and mouse controls in Descent will take some getting used to. This was something I struggled with at first. The mouse serves the same purpose as in other shooters. Moving the mouse will look around the environment. In most shooters, mouse movement is 1-to-1. If the player moves their mouse quickly, the movement in-game will correspond equally. In Descent, large quick mouse movements move the ship very slowly. It's difficult to describe, but it feels as though your ship is impeded by something. This is because the ship can only turn at a certain speed. Once it hits its top speed, it can't turn any quicker. For the best results, the player needs to move the mouse very slowly and deliberately. Small, concentrated movements work best. With some practice, it starts to feel more natural, and eventually I found I didn't even have to think about it. Just something to be aware of if you've never played Descent and decide to use keyboard and mouse as your control method. In terms of environments, the game takes place entirely within claustrophobic, decaying mining stations. Oppressive and harsh. Narrow, curving hallways open up to larger rooms, all interconnected through web-like tunnels. Turning a corner almost certainly means meeting with at least a few infected robots. And in later levels, these encounters turn into confrontations with swarms of massive enemies, equipped with rocket launchers and Gatling guns. There's quite a large variety of robots to fight, with new encounters being introduced through a briefing before a level begins. The player can skip these, but it's beneficial to learn about the robots they'll be facing. Each type has its own behavioral patterns, and some can be especially dangerous. The player starts equipped with primary and secondary weapons. You'll start with lasers as your primary weapon and concussion missiles as your secondary. As you proceed through the game, you'll find more primary and secondary weapons, which can be switched to at any time. The player can only have one primary and one secondary weapon equipped at a time. However, the primary and secondary weapons that have been equipped can be fired at the same time. Primary weapons are generally energy-based. Energy weapons will use up a reserve of energy ammo at varying rates when fired. Additional energy ammo can be collected when dropped by enemies or through energy centers, allocated areas of the map that restore energy while the ship is inside. The lasers start at level 1, firing a pair of somewhat weak lasers. Once an additional laser pickup is found, the laser will increase by 1 level, maxing out at 4. Each additional level will increase the laser's power. Additionally, the quad laser upgrade will add 2 additional lasers to the ship, allowing the player to shoot 4 lasers at a time. Lasers are very precise and use relatively little energy ammo, making them a great choice through the entire game once upgraded. The other primary weapons include the spread fire cannon, which fires 3 very effective energy orbs at a time and shoots in an alternating horizontal and vertical pattern. The plasma cannon, which fires a volley of very effective energy orbs at a high rate of fire. It does, however, eat through energy ammo very quickly. The fusion cannon, which fires a pair of large, high-powered lasers. This weapon can be charged through holding the fire key. The longer it's charged, the more ammo it will use and the more damage it will do. However, charging too long will begin to lower the player's health, so use this weapon with care. And finally, the Vulcan cannon. This is the only primary weapon that does not use energy, but conventional ammunition that can be restocked through pickups. It's a machine gun with a high rate of fire, and unlike the other primary weapons, is a hit scan weapon, meaning the bullets make contact as soon as the player presses the fire key. Secondary weapons include the concussion missile, a fairly standard missile that does a good amount of damage, but nothing spectacular. The homing missile, which is essentially a concussion missile that locks on and follows enemies when fired. The proximity bomb, which floats wherever placed and explodes on contact with something. The smart missile, which releases energy bombs that lock onto targets and explode on contact. And the mega missile, which creates a massive explosion on impact and destroys all enemies within a certain radius. The player does have some protection against enemies in the form of their shields. This is essentially Descent's form of health. If the player's shields drop to 0, their ship will explode, and they'll lose a life. Upon losing a life, any weapons collected will be dropped, and will float at that location, where they can be recovered upon starting with a new life. In order to regenerate shields, the player will need to pick up shield boost. Shields will start at 100, but can be boosted to 200. Additionally, extra lives can be collected through an item pickup, along with other item pickups such as the cloaking device and invulnerability. As mentioned earlier, along with destroying the mines and the robots within, the player does have a secondary optional goal, saving hostages hidden in each mine. These are human workers that were sealed away by the mining robots after their infection. If the player takes the time to hunt them down and let them into their ship, they will earn bonus points at the level's completion. Descent was successful upon its release, leading to 2 direct sequels, 1996's Descent 2 and 1999's Descent 3. It also served as a heavy inspiration for other games, such as 1998's Forsaken, another 6 Degrees of Freedom first-person shooter by Probe Entertainment and Acclaim. Original Descent creators Matt Toshlog and Mike Kulas also served as directors on Revival Productions' 2018 game Overload, a modern spiritual successor to the Descent series. But does the original Descent hold up? In my opinion, it does. In terms of DOS games, Descent's technical achievements stood out in the crowd, and the gameplay formula is very easy to learn and very engaging in execution. It may take new players a bit to get used to how the game controls, and the twisting environments can be more than a little confusing, but it doesn't take long before you're destroying robots and reactors left and right. Like other first-person shooters of its day, it has their arcade-like, skill-based pick-up-and-play gameplay that keeps players coming back for years, and I think this is a series I can look forward to enjoying much more in the future. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.